15 years of marriage, and my husband walked out of our anniversary gala, claiming he was saving a deal. But the security cameras showed me the truth. My mother-in-law handing him the keys to a secret life, wishing him fun with his real family. They thought they were carving up my empire like vultures, but they forgot one thing. I'm the one who built the cage they're sitting in. Let me tell you how it all began. It was supposed to be the night that crowned everything we had built together. 300 guests in the grand ballroom of our Hamptons estate, crystal chandeliers reflecting off champagne towers, an orchestra playing Sinatra because Jonathan always said Frank reminded him of our first dance. I had spent 4 months planning every detail. The hydrangeas flown in from Napa, the embossed invitations, the 12-course tasting menu from a chef I'd personally recruited out of Nantucket. 15 years. That is not just a number. That is a woman's entire prime, poured into one man's last name. Jonathan stood beside me at the head table, smiling that boardroom smile he practiced in the mirror every morning. His hand rested on my waist like a prop. I remember thinking how perfectly he played the role. Devoted husband, grateful partner, the man who owed his empire to nobody but his own brilliance. He clinked his glass and toasted to the woman behind the curtain, and our guests laughed because they assumed it was a compliment. I knew better. I had always known better. I just chose not to listen. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced down, and something shifted behind his eyes. A flicker, quick as a snake's tongue. He leaned into my ear, close enough that anyone watching would think he was whispering something romantic. Instead, he said, "I have to go. Mercer Capital is about to collapse. If I don't get there tonight, we lose 30 million. He squeezed my shoulder the way you squeeze a doorknob on your way out. "Just keep smiling, Nat. You're good at that." And he was gone. Vanished into the downpour like a man who had somewhere better to be on the night that was supposed to belong to us. I stood there with 300 people expecting me to sparkle. So I did. I laughed, I danced, I raised my glass and thanked every guest by name, because that is what Natalie Richardson does. She holds the roof up while the walls are crumbling. But something cold had settled in my chest, something heavier than sadness. It was suspicion. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, the quiet kind. The kind that has been sleeping in your bones for years, and tonight, it simply opened its eyes. After the last guest left, and the caterers packed away the wreckage of a celebration that never really was, I walked down the hallway toward the East Wing, our security room. 8 monitors, 16 camera feeds. I had installed that system myself after a break-in scare 3 years ago. Jonathan called it paranoid. Funny how paranoia becomes wisdom when the threat lives inside your own house. I rewound the footage to 9:14 p.m., 20 minutes before Jonathan's phone buzzed. And there it was, the service entrance. My mother-in-law, Martha Vance, 72 years old, the woman whose hip replacement I paid for, whose nursing team I personally vetted, whose every medical bill had my signature at the bottom. Martha was standing in the rain, pressing a single key into Jonathan's palm. She cupped his face the way mothers do when they are sending their sons off to something precious. And then she said the words that cracked my spine in two. "Go on, sweetheart. Go be with your real family. You deserve a little happiness tonight." I watched it 3 times. I did not cry. I did not scream. I sat in that cold leather chair and felt every nerve in my body go still, the way the ocean pulls back before a tsunami. My hand was wrapped around a champagne flute so tight I could feel the crystal trembling against my bones. But my eyes were ice. Real family. 15 years and I was the counterfeit. Before we dive deeper into the ruins of my marriage, please hit the like button and let me know in the comments. Where are you listening from today? Your support means the world to me as I share this journey. The counterfeit. That word sat in my throat like a stone the rest of that night. I walked through every empty room of that Hamptons house, still decorated with anniversary banners and half-wilted hydrangeas, and I could smell 15 years rotting beneath the perfume. But before I tell you what I did next, I need you to understand what those 15 years actually cost me. Because Jonathan Vance did not build a single thing. I did. I met him in 2004 at a foreclosure auction in downtown Los Angeles. I was 25 years old, wearing a blazer I had bought at a thrift store on Melrose, and heels that pinched so badly I had band-aids on both ankles. I had exactly $11,000 in my savings account, every cent earned from restoring craftsman bungalows in Pasadena, while other girls my age were out enjoying their 20s. Jonathan was standing near the back of the room, tall, confident, wearing a suit that cost more than my car. He did not bid on a single property. He was there to watch. I was there to win. And I did. I bought a condemned Victorian on Wilshire for $68,000, and I turned it into a $400,000 sale in 9 months. That was the first brick of Richardson Heritage Design. My hands, my blueprint. My sleepless nights sanding oak floors at 2 in the morning because I could not afford a crew. Jonathan noticed me the way men notice useful things. He took me to dinner at Spago, told me I had an extraordinary eye, and within 6 months, he had convinced me that his vision for a real estate investment fund was the future we should build together. He needed seed capital. I emptied my account. $147,000. Everything I had saved since I was 19. I remember signing that wire transfer at the bank on Figueroa Street, my hand trembling, and Jonathan standing behind me saying, "This is going to change our lives, Nat. I promise you." He was right about one thing. It changed mine. I just did not realize it would take 15 years to see the bill. While Jonathan flew first class to pitch investors in New York and London, I was renovating properties 16 hours a day across the San Fernando Valley. I learned plumbing from a retired contractor named Earl, who charged me half price because he said I reminded him of his daughter. I taught myself historical preservation codes by reading at the laundromat while my work clothes tumbled dry. Every dollar of profit went into 2 places: growing my firm and funding Jonathan's fund. He never asked how I managed. He never once walked through a job site and said thank you. But I told myself that was just how ambitious men operated. They focused forward. They did not look down at the hands holding them up. I was raised to believe that a marriage was a partnership where both people pulled equally, even if one pulled louder than the other. And then there was Martha. When Jonathan's mother had her first stroke in 2012, it was not Jonathan who flew to Palm Springs and sat in the ICU for 9 days. It was me. I found the neurologist. I vetted every nurse. When her insurance denied the rehabilitation program, I wrote the check, $86,000, because she was my family. Or so I believed. I moved her into the guest house on our Malibu property, hired a private chef for her heart-healthy meals, and sat with her on Sundays listening to stories about Jonathan's childhood, how brilliant he was, how destined for greatness. She would pat my hand and say, "You are such a good wife, Natalie. My Jonathan is so lucky." Lucky. That is what she called it. My labor, my money, my devotion. Lucky. As if everything I had given was just weather that happened to blow in Jonathan's direction. And now I knew what she really thought. I was not family. I was the funding. The funding. That is all I ever was to the Vance family. But what made that night in the security room so much worse, what turned betrayal into something that felt closer to surgery without anesthesia, was not Jonathan. It was not even Martha. It was Marcus, my own blood, my sister's boy, the child I had raised like a son when his mother lost her battle with cancer and his father disappeared into a bottle somewhere outside Bakersfield. Marcus Richardson was supposed to be the one person on this earth who would never turn the knife. And he did not just turn it, he sharpened it first. Let me take you back to 2016. Marcus was 22, fresh out of Cal Poly with a degree in architecture and a confidence that reminded me so much of myself at that age it made my chest ache. He showed up at my Santa Monica office with a portfolio full of ambitious sketches and no idea how the real world worked. Most firms would not have given him a second glance. I gave him a desk, a salary, and something no school could teach: my time. Every evening after the crews went home, I walked him through blueprints, zoning laws, preservation codes, the politics of the California Historical Society. I taught him how to read a contractor's bid and spot the lies in the line items, how to shake hands with city councilmen and never blink first. I was not just his boss. I was building a legacy. Marcus was supposed to carry Richardson heritage design into the next generation, the way a son carries his mother's name into rooms she will never enter. And for a while, he did beautifully. He led the restoration of a 1920s Art Deco theater in Long Beach that earned us a state preservation award. He charmed clients twice his age because he had that Richardson fire, the same hunger I had when I was buying condemned houses with borrowed courage. I remember watching him accept that plaque and thinking, this is it. This is what all the sacrifice was for. Not Jonathan's fund, not Martha's gratitude. This boy, this legacy. But there were cracks. Small ones at first, the kind you explain away because love makes you generous with excuses. Around 2019, Marcus started showing up to meetings in a Porsche Cayenne that cost more than his annual salary. When I asked him about it, he laughed and said he had made some smart investments. I wanted to believe him, so I did. Then came the closed-door meetings. I would walk past the conference room and see Marcus on a video call with Jonathan, blinds drawn, voices low, laptops angled away from the glass. When I asked, Jonathan would wave his hand and say, "Just picking the kid's brain about some properties. Relax, Nat." And Marcus would nod with that same easy grin, as if I were the unreasonable one for wondering why my husband and my nephew needed privacy to discuss buildings that belonged to me. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself that Jonathan was simply mentoring Marcus in finance, the way I mentored him in design. I told myself that family does not betray family, because that was the code I was raised on. You protect your own, and your own protects you. That is the deal. That is the covenant. But covenants only work when both sides honor them, and I was the only one still keeping my word. That night in the Hamptons, after I watched Martha hand Jonathan that key, I pulled up the company server logs on my laptop. And there, buried in a folder Marcus had labeled Archive, Do Not Open, I found the first thread of a conspiracy that would unravel everything I thought I knew about loyalty, about blood, about the people I had carried on my back while they quietly measured me for a coffin. The enemy was not outside the gates. The enemy had been sitting at my dinner table, calling me auntie, and eating off plates I paid for. Eating off plates I paid for. That image burned behind my eyes for hours. But I want you to understand something about me. I am not a woman who crumbles. I am a woman who builds. And when someone tries to demolish what I have built, I do not stand in the rubble and weep. I get the blueprints. I study the damage. And then I design something they never saw coming. The morning after the anniversary gala, I woke up at 4:30, brewed coffee in the dark kitchen, and made 3 phone calls. The first was to Helen Kwok, the most ruthless forensic accountant in Los Angeles, a woman who had helped the FBI untangle a Ponzi scheme in Beverly Hills. The second was to David Salazar, a private investigator who did not ask questions, only found answers. The third was to my attorney, Grace Yamamoto, who had drafted every contract Richardson Heritage Design had ever signed. I told Grace one sentence: I need you to audit every transaction Marcus Richardson has touched in the last 3 years. She paused for 2 seconds and said, I will clear my calendar. Within 72 hours, Helen's preliminary report landed in my encrypted inbox. The numbers told a story that no amount of charm could rewrite. Marcus had been duplicating our proprietary restoration blueprints, designs I had spent decades developing, techniques that were the intellectual backbone of my company, and transferring them through a shell corporation registered in Delaware under the name Archstone Consulting. I had never heard of Archstone. But Helen traced its sole beneficiary in 48 hours. Jonathan Vance. My husband was using my own nephew to steal my life's work and sell it to Grayfield Partners, the largest competing preservation firm on the West Coast. The very company that had tried to poach my clients for years. Jonathan was not just betraying our marriage. He was auctioning off my legacy to the enemy while I slept 10 feet away from him. But here is where I had to become someone I had never been before. I could not confront them. Not yet. David warned me that if I moved too early, Jonathan's lawyers would claim the transfers were authorized restructuring, and Marcus would say he acted on my behalf. I needed the full chain, every email, every wire transfer, every signature. So I did what no one expected Natalie Richardson to do. I played dumb. That Wednesday, Jonathan came home from the city looking exhausted, his tie loosened, his jaw tight. I poured him a glass of the Napa Cabernet he liked and asked, with the softest voice I could manufacture, "Honey, how is the fund doing? You have been under so much pressure. I worry about you." He looked at me the way you look at a golden retriever, grateful and slightly amused by the simplicity. "It is complicated, Nat. Numbers stuff. You would not enjoy it." I smiled and touched his hand. Inside, I was cataloging every micro-expression on his face, every hesitation in his voice, the way his left eye twitched when he lied. I had spent 30 years reading floor plans. Reading a man who underestimated me was child's play. The next morning, Marcus walked into my office unannounced while I had Helen's report open on my second monitor. My heart slammed against my ribs. I clicked the screen dark in one motion, picked up a fabric swatch from my desk, and turned to him with a smile so steady it could have held up a cathedral. "Marcus, perfect timing. What do you think, Italian marble or Portuguese limestone for the Brentwood lobby?" He glanced at the blank screen for half a second that lasted a lifetime. Then he grinned and said, "Limestone, classic never fails, Auntie." He called me Auntie, and I let him, because the woman he thought he was talking to no longer existed. She had been replaced by someone far more patient and infinitely more dangerous. Patient and dangerous. That is exactly what I needed to be, because the next discovery nearly broke me in a way the others had not. The blueprints, the shell company, the closed-door meetings, those were crimes against my business. What David Salazar uncovered next was a crime against my soul. 2 weeks into the investigation, David called me from a parking garage in Century City. His voice was flat, the way professionals sound when the news is ugly. "Natalie, I need you to sit down." I told him I was already sitting. He said, "I found where Jonathan goes on his business trips. It is a condominium on Wilshire Corridor, Unit 2214, lease signed under Archstone Consulting. The same shell corporation Marcus had built to siphon my designs. But this unit was not an office. It was a home, occupied by a woman named Sienna Vane, 29 years old, a former junior associate at Jonathan's fund who had quietly resigned 6 months prior. David sent me the photographs that evening. I opened them alone in my study with the door locked. Sienna walking into the building with grocery bags. Sienna and Jonathan leaving a restaurant in West Hollywood, his hand on the small of her back. Sienna at a jewelry counter in Beverly Hills, trying on a necklace while Jonathan stood beside her with his credit card out, my credit card, linked to the joint account I had been funding for 15 years. And then I saw the necklace, a Cartier Panthère pendant with emerald eyes. I recognized it immediately because Jonathan had given me the exact same one for our 10th anniversary. He had told me he had searched 3 cities to find something worthy of the woman who built his world. Those were his words. Worthy of the woman who built my world. And now his mistress was wearing a copy of my memory around her neck, paid for with my money. I stared at that photograph until the edges blurred. I was not crying. My eyes simply refused to process what they were seeing. Helen's financial report confirmed what my gut already knew. Vance Investment Group was hemorrhaging money. Over $300 million in losses across failed biotech bets and a collapsed commercial real estate portfolio. Jonathan had been covering the shortfall by liquidating my assets. He convinced Marcus to reclassify 3 of my most valuable restoration properties as underperforming holdings, transfer them to Archstone, and sell them to Grayfield Partners at below market value. The cash flowed into Jonathan's fund to keep it breathing long enough to avoid an SEC investigation. My husband and my nephew were butchering my company, piece by piece, to keep his sinking ship afloat and his mistress in designer jewelry. I sat in that study and did the math. Not the emotional math, the real numbers. Jonathan had drained approximately $47 million from my portfolio over 18 months. $47 million. That is not a mistake. That is not poor judgment. That is a coordinated demolition performed by people who sat across from me at Thanksgiving dinner and told me they loved me. Marcus had earned a $300,000 consulting fee from Archstone for his role. $300,000. That was the price of my trust. That was the price of every bedtime story I read him when he was 9 years old. Every tuition check I signed. Every Sunday I drove to Bakersfield to pull him out of a house that smelled like whiskey and regret. I closed the laptop. I walked to my bedroom closet, opened the velvet box where my own Panther pendant sat, and held it under the light. 2 identical necklaces. One bought with love, one bought with theft. In that moment, something inside me completed its transformation. The grief was over. What remained was architecture. Cold, precise, load-bearing architecture. I was going to dismantle every single one of them. And I was going to do it so cleanly they would not hear the walls falling until they were already buried. Buried. That was the plan. But before I could bury them, I had to sit across from them one last time and smile like nothing had changed. Because the best demolition begins with a dinner party. It was a Sunday evening, 3 weeks after the anniversary gala, and I had invited the whole family to our Malibu house for what I called a little gratitude dinner. Jonathan thought it was charming. Martha thought it was overdue. Marcus brought a bottle of wine that cost more than his monthly contribution to the company's retirement fund. A detail I noted with the precision of a woman who now tracked every dollar the way a surgeon tracks a pulse. Grace Yamamoto had told me to act normal for 6 more days. 6 days until every document was locked, every account was flagged, every exit was sealed. So I cooked. I set the table with the heron china my grandmother had left me. I lit candles. And I performed the role of Natalie Richardson, devoted wife and grateful matriarch, one final time. Martha arrived first, wheeled in by her evening nurse. She looked at the dining room and clasped her hands together. "Oh, Natalie, you have outdone yourself. This is just beautiful." I kissed her cheek and said, "Nothing is too much for family, Martha." The word family tasted like iron on my tongue, but I delivered it with a warmth that could have melted glass. She had no idea she was complimenting a woman who had already signed the paperwork to reclaim the very roof over her head. Jonathan arrived next, fresh from wherever he had actually been. I no longer bothered guessing. He kissed my forehead and said, "Smells incredible, Nat. What is the occasion?" I tilted my head and smiled. "Does a wife need an occasion to spoil her husband?" He laughed. That easy, entitled laugh of a man who believed the world was arranged for his convenience. I poured his wine and watched him drink it the way I used to watch wet plaster dry on a restoration wall, studying every crack, waiting for the structure to reveal its weakness. Marcus showed up 20 minutes late, apologizing with that boyish grin that used to remind me of my sister. He hugged me and said, "Auntie, I do not deserve you." For once, he was telling the truth. He sat down next to Jonathan, and I watched them exchange a glance so quick most people would have missed it. But I was not most people anymore. I was a woman who had spent 3 weeks learning to see in the dark. Dinner was sea bass with lemon butter, roasted vegetables from the farmer's market in Santa Monica, and a sourdough bread I had baked that morning because Martha once told me homemade bread reminded her of her own mother. Every detail was deliberate. Every kindness was a farewell. Halfway through the meal, Martha launched into her favorite sermon, how Jonathan had always been destined for great things, and how she prayed every night that he would find true happiness. She looked directly at me when she said it. True happiness. As if the 15 years I had given were a detour on Jonathan's road to something better. I refilled her water glass and said nothing. Some silences are louder than any response. After dessert, I brought out a small velvet box and placed it in front of Martha. "I saw this and thought of you," I said. Inside was a diamond pendant, not extravagant, but beautiful, elegant, the kind of piece a woman wears when she wants to feel cherished. Martha's eyes glistened. She held it to her chest and whispered, "Natalie, you are too good to this family." Jonathan raised his glass. Marcus nodded along, and I sat there, watching the three of them bask in the glow of a generosity they had already decided to repay with ruin. I smiled and thought to myself, enjoy the warmth while it lasts, because winter is coming, and I am the one who controls the thermostat. The thermostat. That was my metaphor. But what I did not tell you was that the night after that dinner, while Jonathan slept beside me, breathing like a man without a single regret, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and fighting the hardest battle of my life. Not against them, against myself, against the part of me that still wanted to believe there was an explanation, a misunderstanding, some version of this story where Marcus was not the villain, and Jonathan was not the con artist, and Martha was not the woman who smiled at my table while praying for my replacement. Grace Yamamoto called it the final audit. She said I needed to see the last piece of evidence before I could move without hesitation. She was right. Hesitation is a luxury for people who have not been robbed by their own family. The next morning, Helen Kwok delivered a flash drive to my office in a sealed envelope marked confidential. I locked my door, pulled the blinds, and plugged it into a laptop that was not connected to the company network, a precaution David had insisted on. The drive contained one folder. Inside that folder were 14 files, emails, wire transfer confirmations, and one document that stopped my breathing for what felt like a full minute. It was a formal letter of intent, drafted on Archstone Consulting letterhead, proposing the sale of Richardson Heritage Design's entire proprietary portfolio. Every blueprint, every restoration methodology, every trade secret I had developed over 20 years, to Grayfield Partners for a lump sum of $12 million. $12 million. My life's work, my intellectual legacy, the thing that made Richardson Heritage Design irreplaceable in the preservation world, valued at $12 million by people who could not have built a single one of those structures with their bare hands. But that was not the part that broke me. The part that broke me was the signature at the bottom of page 6. Marcus Anthony Richardson. My nephew. My blood. The boy I had pulled out of Bakersfield and taught to stand up straight. He had signed his name in that same confident handwriting I had watched him practice at my kitchen table when he was 14. I used to make him write his signature over and over because I told him, "A Richardson signs with authority." And there it was, authority, used to authorize the gutting of everything his aunt had built. I sat in that chair for a long time. I did not move. I did not call anyone. I let the silence do its work, the way I let concrete cure on a foundation. Slowly, completely, until there was nothing soft left. I thought about my sister, who died believing I would take care of her son. I thought about Marcus at 9 years old, hiding under my dining table during a thunderstorm because his father had taught him that the world was something to fear. I thought about the 22-year-old who walked into my office with a cheap portfolio and a dream so big it barely fit through the door. And then I thought about the man who signed that letter of intent and took $300,000 to make it happen. The grief and the love and the fury all collapsed into a single point inside my chest, dense as a diamond and just as hard. I pulled up Grace's number and typed 3 words: execute the plan. She responded in under a minute. Already in motion. You will have confirmation by market open Monday. I closed the laptop, straightened my jacket, and walked out of that office the same way I walked into that foreclosure auction in 2004, with nothing to lose and everything to prove. The only difference was that back then, I was building an empire. Now, I was defending one. I sat there, looking at my nephew's signature on the document that would have ruined me. I gave him everything, and he sold it for a seat at a failing table. What would you do if your own flesh and blood did this to you? Would you forgive, or would you fight back? Let me know by commenting "justice" below. And don't forget to like this video to stand with me. Let's see if they're ready for what's coming. Defending one. That is exactly what Monday morning was about. Not revenge, not anger, defense. The defense of a woman's life work against the people who had mistaken her kindness for weakness and her silence for ignorance. They wanted a storm? I was about to give them a Category 5. I woke at 3:45 a.m., an hour before the New York markets opened. The Malibu house was dark. Jonathan was not home. He had texted at midnight saying he was staying at his Manhattan office to prepare for a board meeting. I knew exactly where he was. Wilshire Corridor, Unit 2214, lying next to Sienna Vane on sheets my money paid for. It did not matter anymore. In a few hours, those sheets would be the most expensive thing he still owned. At 4 a.m. Pacific time, I sat at my desk with 2 phones and a laptop. Grace Yamamoto was on one line. Helen Kwok was on the other. My financial advisor, Raymond Chen, a man I had hired 6 months before the anniversary gala, when I first began sensing something was wrong, was standing by in his office in Century City. The plan was surgical. Over the past 15 years, I had entrusted approximately $1.5 billion in liquid assets to Vance Investment Group. That money was mine. Every clause in every agreement confirmed it. Jonathan had structured the fund to attract outside capital, but the anchor, the bedrock that kept his entire operation credible, was the Richardson allocation. Without it, his fund had the structural integrity of a sandcastle at high tide. At 6:30 a.m. Eastern, the New York Stock Exchange opened. At 6:31, Raymond executed a full redemption order on my entire position in Vance Investment Group. $1.5 billion. Withdrawn. The order hit Jonathan's compliance desk like a freight train. I know this because Helen had a contact inside the fund's back office, a junior analyst who had been quietly cooperating after discovering irregularities in the books 3 months earlier. She told Helen that the compliance team thought it was a system error. They ran the order twice. It was not an error. It was an earthquake, and the epicenter was sitting in a house in Malibu, drinking black coffee and watching the sun come up over the Pacific. By 9 a.m. Eastern, the cascade had begun. When the other institutional investors saw that the Richardson allocation, the single largest position in the fund, had been fully redeemed, they panicked. 2 pension funds pulled their money within the hour. A sovereign wealth fund from the Middle East issued a redemption notice by noon. Jonathan's fund did not have the liquidity to cover the outflows. The positions were leveraged. The credit lines were maxed. By 2 p.m., Vance Investment Group had triggered a forced liquidation clause with its prime broker. The fund that Jonathan had built on my back, with my capital, using my stolen designs as collateral for loans I never authorized, that fund was finished. Not struggling, not wounded. Finished. Jonathan called me at 2:17 p.m. I let it ring 4 times. When I answered, his voice was a sound I had never heard before. High, cracked, stripped of every ounce of that boardroom confidence he wore like cologne. "Natalie, what have you done? Do you understand what you have done?" I am ruined. I am completely ruined. They are going to come after me. The investors, the SEC. Natalie, please, we can talk about this. I let him finish. I let every word hang in the air the way I let plaster set on the wall. Patiently, deliberately, knowing the shape was already decided. And then I said the only thing that needed to be said. How is the emergency deal going, Jonathan? The one that was so urgent you had to leave our anniversary party in the rain. Silence. The kind of silence that sounds like a man realizing the ground beneath him is gone. I hung up, and I did not look back. I did not look back at Jonathan, but I was not finished. A storm does not stop after the first strike. It moves. And my next destination was the guest house on our Malibu bluff, the one I had renovated with my own hands, where Martha Vance had been living rent-free for 4 years on my generosity. It was Tuesday morning. I drove there myself. No driver, no attorney, just me and an envelope. Martha's nurse opened the door looking confused. I smiled at her and said, "I need a few minutes alone with Mrs. Vance." The nurse hesitated, glanced back at Martha sitting in her wheelchair by the bay window, and quietly stepped out. Martha looked up at me with that same sweet, powdered smile she always wore, the one that made strangers think she was a gentle old woman who baked cookies and told stories about the good old days. I used to believe that smile. I used to think it meant love. "Natalie, darling, what a surprise. Sit down. Would you like some tea?" She gestured toward the kitchen as if it were hers, as if every appliance and cabinet I had purchased and installed belonged to her by some divine right of motherhood. I remained standing. "Martha," I said, keeping my voice as level as a foundation beam, "I came to give you something." I placed the envelope beside her teacup. She opened it with her reading glasses perched on her nose and unfolded 2 documents. The first was a property reclamation notice, signed by Grace Yamamoto, informing her that the guest house was being reclaimed effective in 30 days. The second was a termination letter for every medical service I had been funding: the nursing staff, the concierge physician, the premium insurance covering her cardiac rehabilitation, her medications, her physical therapy. All of it. Gone. Martha read both documents twice. The color drained from her face the way paint fades on a neglected wall. Her hands began to tremble, and the diamond pendant I had given her at that farewell dinner, the one she had called a gift from someone too good to this family, caught the morning light and sparkled against her collarbone like a cruel little joke. "Natalie," she whispered, "you cannot do this. I am 72 years old. I have a heart condition. Where am I supposed to go?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and for one fleeting moment, I felt something pull inside my chest. But then I remembered the security footage, the rain, the key, the way she cupped Jonathan's face and said, "Go be with your real family." I remembered every Sunday I spent sitting beside this woman, listening to her praise a son who was robbing me, nodding when she called me lucky. Lucky. As if devotion were an accident. I sat down across from her and spoke with a calmness that surprised even me. "Martha, you told Jonathan on the night of our anniversary to go be with his real family. You knew about the apartment. You knew about Sienna. You handed him the key while I stood in a ballroom full of people, celebrating a marriage you knew was a lie." I paused to let every word land. "You want a real family? Then let your son take care of you. Let the man whose fund I just collapsed buy your medications and hire your nurses. Let him give you what I gave you for 15 years, except this time, with love instead of my checkbook." Martha opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The teacup in her hand rattled against the saucer. I stood, buttoned my coat, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, I turned one last time. "The pendant looks beautiful on you, Martha. Consider it a parting gift from your former daughter-in-law, the one who was never quite family enough." The ocean was impossibly blue when I stepped outside. I took one breath. Deep, full. The kind of breath you take when a weight you have been carrying for years finally lifts off your shoulders. One down. One to go. One to go. And this last one was the hardest. Not because Marcus was powerful. By Tuesday afternoon, he was anything but. It was hard because when I looked at him, I still saw the 9-year-old hiding under my dining table. I still saw my sister's eyes in his face. I still heard her voice in that hospital bed, whispering, "Take care of my boy, Nat. Promise me." I had kept that promise for over a decade, but Marcus had broken his. I called him at 3 p.m. and told him to be at my office by 4. No explanation. He arrived at 3:51, 9 minutes early, which told me everything. The news about Jonathan's fund had hit the financial wires by noon. Marcus walked through my door looking like a man who had not slept in days. Shirt wrinkled, eyes red, Porsche key fob still clipped to his belt, like the last souvenir of a lifestyle built on stolen blueprints. He sat down without being invited, and for the first time in years, he did not call me Auntie. "Natalie," he said. Just my name. Flat. Stripped bare. He knew. I opened the folder on my desk and spread the documents in front of him. The Archstone papers, the wire transfers, the emails discussing which of my designs to sell first, and the letter of intent with his signature on page 6. His confident, practiced signature, the one I had taught him to write at my kitchen table. "Marcus," I said, "I am going to give you a choice. The same kind of choice you did not give me." He opened his mouth, and I held up my hand. "If you speak before I finish, this conversation ends, and my next call is to the district attorney." He closed his mouth. I laid out the terms. Option 1. I turn every document over to the district attorney. Theft of trade secrets, fraud, conspiracy. He was looking at a minimum of 8 years in federal prison. His name in the papers. His face on the news. Every architect in California knowing that Marcus Richardson sold out the woman who made him. Option 2. He signs a confession drafted by Grace Yamamoto, admitting to every act of theft and fraud. In exchange, I do not press criminal charges, but he forfeits all inheritance rights to the Richardson estate, permanently. He surrenders his architectural license, barred from practicing in any state for the rest of his life. And he never contacts me again. Marcus stared at the documents. His hands were shaking the way mine had shaken when I signed that wire transfer on Figueroa Street 20 years ago. Funny how money trembles the same way, whether you are giving it in love or losing it in disgrace. "Auntie," he whispered, and the word hit me like a hammer wrapped in velvet. "I am sorry. Jonathan said..." I stopped him. "Do not say his name in this room. You had a choice, Marcus. You chose a Porsche and a consulting fee over the woman who buried your mother and raised you from the wreckage. Sign." He signed. His hand could barely hold the pen. When he finished, he looked up at me with tears running down his face, searching for something. Forgiveness, maybe, or recognition, or the auntie who used to read him bedtime stories and drive to Bakersfield on Sundays. But that woman was gone. In her place sat the architect of his consequences. "Leave the key fob on the desk," I said. "The Porsche was purchased with my stolen revenue. It is no longer yours." He unclipped it and placed it on the wood without a word. Then he walked out of my office, out of my building, and out of my life. I listened to his footsteps fade down the hallway, and when the elevator doors closed, I allowed myself exactly 10 seconds of grief. 10 seconds for the boy I raised. 10 seconds for my sister's memory. 10 seconds for the family I thought I had. Then I closed the folder and called Grace. It is done. All of it. All of it. Every lie. Every stolen blueprint. Every forged signature and secret apartment and diamond necklace bought with my money. All of it. Finished. But this story does not end in the wreckage. It ends in what I built from it. 3 weeks after Marcus walked out of my office, the financial press caught up with the collapse of Vance Investment Group. It was everywhere. Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, CNBC. Jonathan Vance, once celebrated as one of the sharpest fund managers on the West Coast, was now the subject of an SEC investigation, 3 civil lawsuits from institutional investors, and a bankruptcy filing that revealed debts exceeding $400 million. The man who had toasted me as the woman behind the curtain no longer had a curtain. He did not even have a stage. And then came the moment I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It was a Thursday afternoon in October. I was walking into a meeting at our New York office on Park Avenue when David Salazar called me. "Natalie, turn on the news. He is outside the stock exchange." I opened my phone and saw the live feed. Jonathan Vance, standing on the sidewalk outside the New York Stock Exchange, surrounded by cameras and reporters, his suit rumpled, his face gray. He was holding a handwritten sign that read, "Natalie, please, I have nothing left." When a reporter asked him what he wanted, he dropped to his knees on the concrete, right there, on the busiest sidewalk in American finance, and said into the microphone, "I am begging my wife to forgive me. I made a terrible mistake. She is the only person who can save me." I watched that clip for exactly 4 seconds. Then I closed my phone and walked into my meeting. I did not respond. I did not issue a statement. I did not look back, because I had already learned, a long time ago on a rainy night in the Hamptons, that looking back is a luxury for people who have not yet decided who they are going to become. The divorce was finalized in December. I kept everything that was mine, which was nearly everything. Jonathan kept his debts, his lawsuits, and a reputation that no amount of kneeling could repair. Martha was relocated to a state-assisted care facility, adequate, clean, but a world away from the Ocean View guest house and the private chef and the Sunday conversations she had used to gather intelligence for her son. Marcus disappeared from the architecture world entirely. I heard he moved to Oregon. I did not verify. Some chapters are not worth rereading. In January, I stood on a stage at the Forbes Women's Summit in San Francisco and announced the creation of the Richardson Heritage Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing financial literacy education, legal aid, and emergency grants to women over 50 who have been victims of financial betrayal by family members or partners. I funded it with $10 million of my own money. The audience stood. I will not lie to you, I cried. Not from sadness, from the weight of a promise finally kept. Not the promise I made to my sister, though I had honored that as best I could. The promise I made to myself, standing in a thrift store blazer at a foreclosure auction in 2004, that I would build something that mattered. I looked out at that room full of women, executives, entrepreneurs, mothers, survivors, and I said the words that had been forming inside me since the night I watched Martha hand that key to my husband. The greatest security a woman can possess is not a ring on her finger or a name on a deed. It is the knowledge inside her own mind and the capital under her own control. No one can take from you what you truly own. Not a husband, not a mother-in-law, not even your own blood. Build your foundation with your own hands, and no storm will ever bring you down. They tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was the architect. I've rebuilt my life on a foundation of truth and independence. What do you think of my choice? Was the punishment fair? Share your thoughts in the comments, and please like this video if you believe in the power of a woman who knows her worth. Thank you for listening to my story.